Hello everyone. For this video, I'm returning to some familiar grounds with another iceberg chart. I'm sure you know by now what an iceberg chart is, but for those uninitiated, it's a tier list that ranks information based on obscurity. It started off as a somewhat obscure meme, but became popularized by Mish Koz's explanation of the Super Mario 64 iceberg in 2020, and since then, iceberg explanations have become a very common video essay formula. Now, I'm no stranger to this type of video before, since you may know me for the Steely Dan Iceberg videos I made a while back. This time, however, I'll be talking about a different artist that I also enjoy a good deal, Billy Joel. If you don't know, Billy Joel is a popular singer-songwriter nicknamed the Piano Man who is known for his chart-topping hit songs that range from soft piano ballads to pop rock anthems. Now, why am I talking about Billy Joel? Well, pretty much everyone knows who he is, but many only know what's on the surface. Anyway, like the Steely Dan Iceberg series, I will be splitting this one up into two parts, with one half of the iceberg in each part. Before we get started here, I would like to clarify that most of what I'll be talking about in this part might be common knowledge to an average Billy Joel fan, and I hope that the hardcore Joel heads who are watching can, at the very least, get a kick out of this video. So, without further ado, here is the Billy Joel Iceberg. This layer is composed of Billy's most popular songs: Piano Man, Uptown Girl, Still Rock and Roll to Me, the list goes on. Considering how big of a rock star Billy Joel is, I'm sure everyone who lives in a society has heard at least one of these songs on the radio, on TV, or pretty much anywhere there's music. I won't go into detail about every single one since I know other people have done so better than I ever could, but I'd like to note a few interesting bits of trivia about some of them. Uptown Girl. When Joel started writing this song, it was initially inspired by model Elle Macpherson, who he was dating at the time. When Joel eventually started dating model and future wife Christy Brinkley, the lyrics were reworked to be about her, and Brinkley even played the Uptown Girl in the music video. My Life. This song was used as the intro music for the 80s sitcom Bosom Buddies, starring Tom Hanks and Peter Scolari. Joel's version of the song couldn't be used due to legal issues, so a cover by Gary Bennett was used instead. For the syndicated prints and DVD releases of the series, however, the song was replaced entirely by an original song titled Shake Me Loose. Big Shot. Joel has stated before that this song was partly about himself, but also about Bianca Jagger, ex-wife of Rolling Stones frontman Mick Jagger, which has led some to believe that it was specifically written after a date between the two. While the song was definitely written about Bianca Jagger, the part about it being based on a date she and Joel had is untrue. One account says that the idea came about when Mick complained to Billy about Bianca one day, though another suggests that Joel was inspired to write Big Shot after a dinner with the Jaggers. Either way, Joel states that the song was written from Mick's perspective. Only the Good Die Young. This song was initially going to have a reggae beat, though it was changed to a shuffle due to the disapproval of drummer Liberty DeVito. A demo featuring said reggae beat is present on the My Lives box set, but more on that later. Anyway, the song also didn't do very well on the charts until it was banned in certain communities because of its supposed anti-Catholic undertones. This censorship only made the song more popular and led to Only the Good Die Young becoming one of Joel's biggest songs. Just the Way You Are. This song was very important to establishing Joel's mainstream popularity, as it was his first massive hit and it brought him his first Grammy wins with Record of the Year and Song of the Year. Joel has stated before that Just the Way You Are was written for his first wife and former manager Elizabeth Weber as a birthday gift, and because of this, he refused to perform it for a time and doesn't really like performing it now because of their divorce in 1982. Joel and the band also considered scrapping the song, but they were eventually convinced by Phoebe Snow and Linda Ronstadt to keep it. Moving Out. The sound of the car revving up and driving away at the end of the song was done using bassist Doug Stegmeyer's 1960s Corvette. Studio albums. Between 1971 and 1993, Billy Joel released 12 pop albums: Cold Spring Harbor, Piano Man, Street Life Serenade, Turnstiles, The Stranger, 52nd Street, Glass Houses, The Nylon Curtain, An Innocent Man, The Bridge, Stormfront, and River of Dreams. Joel didn't release another studio album until 2001 with Fantasies and Delusions, which is a one-off classical album that features playing by British-Korean pianist and longtime friend of Joel's, Richard Hyung-Ki Joo. Scenes from an Italian Restaurant. Scenes from an Italian Restaurant from the Stranger album is Joel's longest pop song, clocking in at about 7.5 minutes. According to an interview, he took a lot of inspiration from the 16-minute B-side medley of the Beatles' Abbey Road, and the concept was more or less based around the idea of what happened to the prom king and queen after high school. The song itself has 4 sections: the opening piano ballad, the upbeat jazz-inspired section, the rock and roll section that Joel and many fans refer to as the Ballad of Brenda and Eddie, and the closing piano ballad that ties the whole thing together. Each movement also transitions into the next with different elements, specifically with the sax solo from the first to the second, the jazz instrumental from the second to the third, and the orchestra from the third to the fourth. Scenes from an Italian Restaurant has become one of Joel's most popular songs among critics and fans alike, becoming his second most played song in concert. Songs in the Attic. Songs in the Attic was Joel's first live album, which was released in 1981. It was recorded in mid-1980 during the Glass Houses tour, and according to the liner notes, Joel wanted to, quote, provide a selected sampling of the earlier stuff, played the right way, with honest road muscle, unquote. In other words, he wanted to give newer fans who were used to the consistent band sound of the late 70s a taste of the earlier material, which was mostly recorded using session musicians. Upon its release, Songs in the Attic was immensely popular, with it peaking at number 8 on the Billboard 200, and it even had a few singles: Say Goodbye to Hollywood, She's Got Away, You're My Home, and Los Angelinos, with the latter only being released in Japan. 5 promotional videos for the singles, along with Everybody Loves You Now, were also recorded, albeit with audio that's different from the album. Since then, the album has been highly celebrated among Billy Joel listeners, with it even ranking higher than a few studio albums in a Rolling Stone magazine readers poll. Grammy Awards. Throughout his solo career, Joel has won 5 Grammy Awards and was nominated for 23 of them. As mentioned before, his first wins were in 1978 with Just the Way You Are, winning both the Record and Song of the Year awards, but he also won Album of the Year and Best Male Pop Vocal Performance in 1979 with 52nd Street, as well as Best Male Rock Vocal Performance with Glass Houses in 1981. He also performed at the awards ceremony 3 times, playing New York State of Mind in 1988, We Didn't Start the Fire in 1990, and The River of Dreams in 1994. In the latter performance, Joel notably extended the pause before the final chorus in protest after Frank Sinatra's acceptance speech from a few minutes earlier in the ceremony was cut short.
Valuable advertising time going by. Valuable advertising time going by. Dollars, dollars.
Covers. Joel's music has been covered by a large number of people, be they amateur or professional. Some of the more well-known covers include Beyoncé's cover of Honesty, Garth Brooks' cover of Shameless, Dolly Parton's cover of Travelin' Prayer, Ariana Grande's cover of Vienna, and Barbra Streisand, Mel Torme, Tony Bennett, and Alicia Keys' respective covers of New York State of Mind. On the flip side, Joel himself has done a good handful of covers. Some notable ones include the Beatles songs I'll Cry Instead and Back in the USSR, with the former being done live and released as a B-side to the Innocent Man single, and the latter being part of the live album Concert, Shout by the Isley Brothers, which was performed at Yankee Stadium in 1990, the Disney song When You Wish Upon a Star, which was included in the 1991 compilation Simply Mad About the Mouse, and the 3 songs included on the Greatest Hits Volume 3 compilation. Bob Dylan's To Make You Feel My Love, whose release actually predates Dylan's original, Leonard Cohen's Light as the Breeze, and Freddie Scott's Hey Girl. Joel also did a few more covers for film soundtracks, specifically the Duke Ellington song In a Sentimental Mood for the 1992 film A League of Their Own, the Elvis Presley songs Heartbreak Hotel and All Shook Up for a Honeymoon in Vegas in the same year, and the Lloyd Price song Where Were You on Our Wedding Day for the 1999 film Runaway Bride. There are definitely more of all of these, but it would take way too much time to list them all here. Other than that, Joel and his band still occasionally do covers of various artists during his concerts. Music videos. Like pretty much every other artist who has been popular within the last 40 years or so, Billy Joel has had a plethora of his songs given the music video treatment. Joel's first known music video for his solo career was a promo video for Cold Spring Harbor, which was said to be shot in Holland and features him singing at the piano synced to the studio cut of Everybody Loves You Now, though before this, he appeared in a couple of videos as part of the Hassles. More on that later. Anyway, a few more of these promo videos were made throughout the 70s, and by the time the 80s rolled around, production of these music videos ramped up due to the rise of music television. As with most music videos in general, Joel's fall under two different styles, being either somewhat artistic with the portrayal of his songs as short narratives or just recorded performances, whether they were done live or in the studio. Most, if not all, of Billy Joel's music videos are archived on YouTube, either by fans or the official Billy Joel channels. TV and film appearances and references. Throughout the decades, Joel and his music have made numerous appearances on television and in movies. Of course, his aforementioned music videos would air on channels like MTV, though his music would also be included in hundreds of different shows and films as part of their soundtracks. Joel also occasionally appears on talk shows and in documentaries, sometimes as a performer and other times as just an interviewee. The only time when he played a role that wasn't himself was with Disney's 1988 film Oliver and Company, in which he played the character of Dodger. For said film, he also recorded vocals for his character's song Why Should I Worry, which was written by Dan Hartman and Charlie Midnight. Besides that, Joel's music would also be referenced and parodied in a few shows, most notably in comedies such as The Office and Family Guy. Zanzibar TikTok trend. Zanzibar, a fan-favorite song from the album 52nd Street, was considered somewhat of a deep cut until 2021 when it went viral on the short video app TikTok. First posted by user @MaxSmith_, these videos consist of an original TikTok dance performed alongside the song. According to Wikipedia, the song was used in nearly 500,000 TikToks by the end of February 2021, though that number is likely much higher now. The trend was even acknowledged by Joel at a concert in mid-2021.
This next song, this was kind of like a thing on TikTok. I don't even know what TikTok is. This was a thing.
The Billy Joel Band. As the name suggests, the Billy Joel Band is the band that backs Billy Joel for live performances and in the studio when he still recorded. The first true iteration of the band was the lineup that recorded Turnstiles, which consisted of drummer Liberty DeVito, bassist Doug Stegmeyer, guitarists Russell Javers and Howie Emerson, and multi-instrumentalist Richie Cannata. Emerson was replaced by guitarist David Brown in 1978, and Cannata was replaced by saxophonist Mark Rivera in 1982, and the band would stagnate until Stormfront started production, when a few lineup changes were made at the discretion of producer Mick Jones. Stegmeyer was dropped in exchange for bassist Skylar DeAle, and the additions of multi-instrumentalist Crystal Tolliver and guitarist Tommy Burns were also made. Keyboardist David Rosenthal was also added as a permanent member during the River of Dreams tour in 1993. In 2006, DeVito, the last remaining original member, was fired and replaced by Chuck Berge, who played drums for the Movin' Out Broadway production. Trumpet player and multi-instrumentalist Carl Fisher was also added to the band that year. As of March 2022, Billy Joel's lineup consists of himself, Mark Rivera, Tommy Burns, Crystal Tolliver, David Rosenthal, Chuck Berge, Carl Fisher, bassist Andy Sitchon, and guitarist Mike Dilkaitis. Billy Joel biopic without Billy Joel. In early March 2022, it was announced that a Piano Man biopic was greenlit by the mini-major film company Gigantic Studios. The film is said to focus on Joel's career before he got big, and as exciting as that sounds, the catch here is that neither his music nor his likeness will be in it. Instead, the film will focus on Erwin Mazur, who was Joel's first manager. The biopic is also written and directed by Adam Ripp, the son of producer and owner of Joel's first record label Artie Ripp, the latter of whom I will talk about later. As of recording this, no trailers or other promotional materials have come out yet. Will it suck? Probably, but only time will tell. We Didn't Start the Fire parodies. Considering how popular of a song We Didn't Start the Fire is, as well as the fact that its lyrics are pretty much just a long list, the song has been parodied hundreds, maybe even thousands of times by so many people. The Avengers, Star Wars, video games, movies, all the years between 1990 and 2021, even the Minecraft Dream SMP. If you can name anything that's been even remotely relevant between now and the beginning of time, there's a good chance there's a We Didn't Start the Fire parody of it. Madison Square Garden residency. Around the start of his Billy Joel in Concert tour in January 2014, Joel began to hold monthly concerts at the legendary Madison Square Garden in New York. He first performed at the Garden on December 14, 1978, and played over 50 concerts there over the span of 35 years before becoming its first music franchise in December 2013. Since the start of the residency, Joel has broken the venue's records for most consecutive sold-out concerts and most total concerts by a single artist. At the time of recording this, Joel has played nearly 80 monthly shows at the Garden, with there being no signs of stopping, as, to quote Billy himself, "As long as there is a ticket demand, we'll keep playing." Phil Ramone. Phil Ramone was the producer of Joel's albums from The Stranger in 1977 to The Bridge in 1986. Before ever meeting Joel, Ramone co-founded the A&R recording studio with Jack Arnold in 1959, where he quickly established his prowess as an innovative producer and sound engineer. Ramone didn't meet Joel until the late 70s, when the latter wanted to have Beatles producer George Martin produce The Stranger, who declined because he didn't want to work with Joel's band. Ramone, who became interested after seeing the band perform at Carnegie Hall in early 1977, understood Joel's struggle, which eventually led to him being chosen to produce the album. Joel's partnership with Ramone for studio albums would come to an end after the production of The Bridge in 1986, though, ironically, the last time they would work together was with Joel's last pop song, All My Life, which was released on Valentine's Day of 2007. Anyway, Ramone would continue to produce for many different artists until his untimely death in early 2013, and since then, he has been regarded as a legendary producer and a pioneer in music technology. Joel compared Taylor Swift to the Beatles. In a November 2021 interview with USA Today, when asked about current artists, Joel likened pop star Taylor Swift to the Beatles. He said, quote, "Taylor is also a very talented girl, and she's productive and keeps coming up with great concepts and songs, and she's huge. You have to give her high marks. She knows music and she knows how to write. She's like that generation's Beatles," unquote. In an interview with Extra TV not long after, Swift said that she was honored to receive this praise, saying, quote, "That honestly broke my brain. I honestly don't really know how to process words like that from someone like him. I'm a huge fan of his, and that's an icon saying that. I don't know if that really happened. I need to see a video," unquote. This became pretty big news from late November to early January, and as a result, Joel has received a bit of backlash from old heads and people born in the wrong generation for his respectable yet pretty bold claim, though an equal number of people have also come to Joel and Swift's defense. Artie Ripp and Family Productions. Family Productions was Billy Joel's first record label, which was run by producer Artie Ripp. Ripp started his career in the late 50s as a singer, though he worked his way up the ranks as a producer throughout the 60s and founded Family Productions in 1970. During his tenure there, Ripp was notorious for taking advantage of his clients, and Joel was no exception to this. He initially signed a 10-record deal with Family Productions, which turned out to be a mistake when his first album with the label, Cold Spring Harbor, was poorly produced with the infamous speed error that Ripp didn't have the money to fix, along with the fact that it was neither distributed nor promoted well. Joel and his backing band at the time weren't paid to tour either, with him recalling in an interview that, quote, "We were touring around in one of these little camper trailer things, eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches," unquote, and the only roadies they had were 2 prostitutes hired by the studio. These awful experiences he had led Joel to flee to California in an attempt to get out of his contract with Family Productions. By 1972, he signed with Columbia Records, who made a deal with Ripp to free Joel of his contract in exchange for publishing rights and royalties from his first 10 albums, though the former was actually given back to Joel as a birthday gift in 1978. Despite how Joel blames Ripp for the failure of Cold Spring Harbor and criticizes him and Family Productions in general, Joel still credits Ripp for discovering him and investing in his talents. Cold Spring Harbor original pressing, remaster, and differences. As I mentioned about a minute ago, Cold Spring Harbor had an incredibly problematic development cycle, leading to both an infamous initial release and reissue. The album was overproduced and mixed at the wrong speed, with it sounding about a semitone higher than it should have, and Joel later joked in an interview that the glitch made him sound like Alvin and the Chipmunks. It was later remixed and reissued in 1983 with no involvement from Joel, since the rights to the original master tapes remained with Family Productions rather than Columbia. For this remaster, Artie Ripp mixed the album slower to closer match Joel's matured 80s voice, and also brought in session musicians for overdubs in order to enhance its sound. Many of the songs were changed to varying degrees, with the most affected being Turn Around, which had its percussion redone and keyboards, synths, and strings added, along with the near removal of Sneaky Pete's pedal steel guitar. You Can Make Me Free had its closing 3-minute jam completely removed, leaving the song at just under 3 minutes. Everybody Loves You Now, while having a nicer rhythm section, has its acoustic guitar nearly muted, and it also has its reverb and reverse effects at the end of the first 2 verses removed. Finally, and most notably, Tomorrow Is Today was stripped down to just piano and vocals, cutting out its bass, percussion, and orchestra sections entirely. While the original pressing is considered by fans to be the definitive version of the album, only the remix has ever been reissued and is the only official version on streaming platforms. Fortunately, many rips of the original exist online, albeit in varying quality. Elizabeth Weber. Elizabeth Weber was Billy Joel's first wife, and they were married from 1973 to 1982. They first met in 1970 when Joel was part of the metal duo Attila with drummer John Small, who Weber was first married to. Joel and Weber began an affair, and when Small eventually found out, Weber cut ties with both men for a time. Joel fell into a deep depression not long after, considering that both his longtime bandmate and friend, along with his lover, had left him. Amends were eventually made between the three of them, I think, and Joel and Weber were married in 1973. While also being his wife, Weber served as Joel's manager, and a few of his songs were inspired by her, notably She's Got Away, Just the Way You Are, and She's Always a Woman, as well as the waitress practicing politics mentioned in Piano Man. She was described by Joel as intelligent and assertive, though she turned out to also be quite manipulative and extravagant during their marriage. A notable instance of this was when Joel wrote Just the Way You Are for her as a gift, with her asking if she could have the publishing in response. When they divorced in 1982, Joel wanted to reconcile, agreeing to buy Weber a townhouse and an expensive car. This desire to once again make amends was shattered when Joel got into a motorcycle accident which broke his hands, after which he recalls that Weber showed up at the hospital with a contract and tried to convince him to sign everything over to her. As of today, Joel and Weber are said to still be on good terms. Christy Brinkley and Alexa Ray Joel. Christy Brinkley is a model, actress, and entrepreneur who was Joel's second wife, married from 1985 to 1994. She was discovered for her modeling talents in the early 70s and rose to star status during the late 70s and early 80s, notably being the first model to appear on the cover of the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue 3 years in a row. Joel and Brinkley first met on the island of St. Bart's in 1983, with Joel playing the piano in the bar and catching the attention of Brinkley along with fellow model Elle Macpherson and future pop star Whitney Houston. Joel would actually date Macpherson for a short while before going out with Brinkley, and the two were wed in 1985. Brinkley would serve as an inspiration for most of the Innocent Man album, and as previously mentioned, famously played the titular Uptown Girl in the music video. She also painted the album cover for River of Dreams. Eventually, she and Joel would have a child named Alexa Ray Joel, who was born on December 29, 1985, and would inspire Billy's songs Temptation and Lullaby Goodnight My Angel. Alexa Ray would eventually become a singer-songwriter herself and delve into the music, fashion, and advertising industries during the mid-2000s and early 2010s. Her latest release was the 2021 single 7 Years. As for Joel and Brinkley's marriage, the two were divorced in 1994 due to Joel's busy schedule, along with likely untrue accusations of him cheating, though they remain good friends to this day. Collaborations with other artists. Throughout his career, Joel has worked a few times with other artists. The most notable instance of this is with the album The Bridge, where Joel duetted Baby Grand with Ray Charles, co-wrote Code of Silence with Cyndi Lauper, who also did backing vocals on the song, and had Steve Winwood play the Hammond organ on Getting Closer. However, Joel doesn't really like working with other artists, and said in a 2021 interview with Howard Stern that he has turned down many offers to collaborate since he can't really get invested if it's not his own idea. The last time he worked in the studio with another artist was with singer-songwriter Cass Dillon for the single Christmas in Fallujah, which was written by Joel and performed by Dillon. However, he occasionally performs some songs with guest artists at his concerts, with some notable instances including Tony Bennett, Paul McCartney, Bruce Springsteen, Paul Simon, Boyz II Men, Miley Cyrus, and even his own daughter. We Are the World involvement. We Are the World was a charity single released in 1985 by the supergroup USA for Africa in support of Ethiopian famine relief efforts, and the song was written by Michael Jackson and Lionel Richie. Billy Joel was part of this recording and sang one line.
And the truth, you know love is all we need.
Sometimes a Fantasy long version. The song Sometimes a Fantasy from Glass Houses had a single release which was longer than the album version. Rather than fading out at about the 3.5 minute mark, the closing guitar solo continues for about 40 seconds longer, with Joel screaming, "I've got blisters on my blisters" at the end in reference to the infamous Beatles quote, "I've got blisters on my fingers," said by Ringo Starr.
I got blisters on my blisters.
This version of the song was under scrutiny for several years, considering that it hasn't been officially re-released until very recently with the 50 Years of Piano Man compilation album. Even so, it wasn't very hard to find before, since multiple rips of it could easily be found on YouTube, and the physical record is quite common on eBay and Discogs. USSR Tour. During the Bridge Tour in 1986, the Kremlin invited Joel to play 6 concerts in Russia the following year, with 3 in Moscow and 3 in Leningrad. This leg of the tour was quite impactful during the time, as it helped build the cultural bridge between the West and communist Russia through Western rock. Joel was one of the first Western artists to tour the country, which let the Soviet citizens, who were already beginning to delve into Western culture, experience it firsthand. Joel also did some relatively crazy stuff at the shows, such as taking off his socks and shoes during her performance of Big Shot, running around the stage, and crowd surfing. There's also the infamous Billy's Red Rage incident, where he flipped over an electric keyboard and broke a mic stand during Some Times of Fantasy because the spotlights were disturbing the audience.
Stop lighting the audience! Why does it always seem to hit me in the middle of the night? Stop it! I'll sure whip it better if I had a hit for me.
Lastly, during the tour, Joel and his daughter had befriended a Russian circus clown named Viktor Razanov who had come to all 6 concerts. Joel was touched by his experience with Razanov and in Russia in general so much that he eventually paid tribute to Viktor with the 1989 anti-war song Leningrad. New York State of Mind alternate versions. New York State of Mind has 3 different versions, with the only substantial difference being the saxophone sections. The first version's sax section was performed by Richie Kanata and is the one from the original LP, whereas the second version's was performed by an unknown musician, though it could either be Mark Rivera or Eddie Daniels, who worked with Joel on his early to mid-80s albums. The latter version is from the 1998 CD reissues as well as the one on most streaming platforms. The spots where the differences are most apparent are, of course, the solo, as well as this part near the end of the song. Just take a listen.
New York.
As for the third version, it's exclusive to the quadraphonic version of the album. The sax part of this version falls in line with the original for the most part, except the solo, which is almost completely different. Also, contrary to popular belief, saxophonist Phil Woods was not part of any Billy Joel recording of New York State of Mind. This misconception probably stems from the fact that he played the solo for Mel Torme's 1977 rendition of the song. Sirius XM channel. Starting in 2014, Billy Joel has had a recurring Sirius XM satellite radio channel that hosts him and his music. From Sirius XM's blog, the channel features, quote, music spanning his decades-long career, including songs from his live and studio albums, as well as Billy telling stories about his music and beyond, unquote. The beyond content varies for the most part, though usually consists of Joel and a few guests DJing and cuts from new releases. The channel is usually up for about a month or so, and has so far come back on a yearly basis. Surprisingly, SiriusXM faced some backlash during the channel's initial run since it replaced the 40s on 4 station, which led to outrage among listeners and many withdrawing their subscriptions. Collected Additional Masters. Collected Additional Masters was a compilation included with the Complete Albums Collection box set released in 2011. The album consists of 17 tracks, including many of the aforementioned covers, as well as miscellaneous studio tracks previously released as singles, B-sides, or part of compilations, with the latter being the focus of this entry. Chronologically, the first of these is Nobody Knows But Me, which was featured on the 1981 children's compilation album In Harmony 2 and is about having an imaginary friend, I think. Next is Elvis Presley Boulevard, which was the B-side to the Allentown single released in 1982 and was written not long after Elvis Presley's death. Then there's You're Only Human and The Night Is Still Young, which were both introduced in the compilation album Greatest Hits Volumes 1 and 2. You're Only Human is about teenage depression, whereas The Night Is Still Young is a coming-of-age song. Both were also released as singles in 1985 and had videos produced for them. After this, House of Blue Light and You Picked a Real Bad Time were the B-sides for We Didn't Start the Fire and All About Soul respectively. Finally, there's All My Life, which was, as mentioned earlier, Joel's last pop song. This one follows a more traditional pop style, and it was written on the occasion of the second anniversary with his third wife, Katie Lee. It probably has the strangest release of any Billy Joel song, as it was first released as a download on the People magazine website on Valentine's Day in 2007 and later appeared on iTunes and as a CD single at Walmart 6 days later. Piano Man is an autobiography. As many would assume, Piano Man was written from Joel's own experience as a piano bar player. After the Cold Spring Harbor fiasco, Joel moved to California with his wife and found work as a lounge musician at the now-defunct Executive Room in Los Angeles, where he would play under the alias Bill Martin so the family production executives couldn't find him. After signing with Columbia Records and leaving Family Productions with the help of the former's lawyers, Joel wrote Piano Man about his experience at the Executive Room, using the atmosphere as the concept and basing the characters off of real people he met at the bar. Face-to-face tours. Between 1994 and 2010, Joel would tour on and off with fellow singer-songwriter Sir Elton John. These tours were immensely popular and proved to be profitable, being noted by Billboard magazine as, quote, the most lucrative co-headlining duo of all time, unquote. An average setlist opens and closes with a mix of both artists' songs, with John and Joel playing their own individual sets in between. However, as the saying goes, all good things must come to an end. During the 2009 tour, Elton John unfortunately caught an E. coli infection, which rescheduled many of the fall dates to early 2010, the year that Joel intended to take off. Since then, Elton John and Billy Joel have not toured together. Even though these concerts would consistently sell out, it's unlikely that there will ever be another face-to-face tour, since Joel stated in a 2012 interview that he found the set lists restrictive. Joel and John's relationship also began to strain due to the former's alcoholism at the time that the latter blamed for canceled tours, though this may not be a primary reason since they quickly reconciled. My Lives. My Lives was a 5-disc box set released in 2005 that features album cuts, B-sides, and other additional masters, live recordings, and unreleased demos and outtakes. As mentioned previously, one of the more notable tracks is the reggae demo of Only the Good Die Young, though there are plenty more interesting demos. This selection includes, but isn't limited to, the Cold Spring Harbor demo Only a Man, Piano Man demos, and demos which would eventually be reworked, including These Rhinestone Days, which would become I've Loved These Days, End of the World, which would become Elvis Presley Boulevard, Prime Over Your Life, which would become The Longest Time, and Motorcycle Song, which would become All About Soul. A few other rarities of note include a few songs from bands that Joel was a part of before going on his own, which I will talk about soon, a version of Zanzibar that extends the closing Freddie Hubbard trumpet solo, a special remix of Keeping the Faith, which is mislabeled as a 12-inch dance remix, and an alternate version of The River of Dreams. Of course, this isn't everything, but if I were to talk about all of it, that would honestly be kind of boring. The video is already boring enough as it is, but anyway. Before we move on, an interesting thing to note is that this compilation was probably unauthorized, since in an interview with Vulture, Joel says that most of My Life's content wasn't supposed to be heard, with him referring it to as twigs and stems and seeds, since, quote, you're not supposed to smoke that shit, unquote. Tomorrow Is Today origins. According to many sources, the song Tomorrow Is Today was mostly derived from a suicide note that Joel had written. The note was found by Erwin Mazur after Joel was hospitalized after drinking a whole bottle of furniture polish. Of course, he survived, and in hindsight, Joel amounts the whole thing to teenage blues.
Tomorrow Is Today. God, I haven't listened to that in years. It's more like a suicide note. I was really depressed at the time I wrote that. I was 21. And I was just bummed out. I think when you're that age, you're going from adolescence into adulthood, you become so self-absorbed that your head can literally go up your ass, and you got to pull it out. Although the lyric was meaningful to me at the time, now from this perspective, I can say, what did he know? He was 21.
The Lost Souls, The Hassles, and Attila were 3 bands that Joel was a member of before he began his solo career. The Lost Souls, formerly known as The Echoes, was formed sometime in the 60s and consisted of Joel along with Bill Zampino, Howard Arthur Blauvelt, who would eventually go on to co-found Ram Jam, James Boss, and Ken Retcher. During their existence, they mostly only did covers and never released anything, though 2 demos they recorded sometime in 1964 titled My Journey's End, which was Joel's first song, and Time Again were included in My Lives. The Lost Souls split up sometime in 1965 or 66, and Joel moved on to The Hassles. The Hassles was first formed in 1964, whose original lineup had John Dezek on lead vocals, Richard McKenna on the guitar, John Small on the drums, and Harry Weber on the bass and organ. Weber was fired in 1966 due to his drug problem and was replaced by Blauvelt and Joel for bass and keyboards respectively. This new lineup would record their self-titled debut in 1967, which was mostly made up of covers, though 2 songs, Every Step I Take and I Can Tell, were co-written and wholly written by Joel respectively. As mentioned previously, 2 promo videos were recorded in 1968 for the songs I Hear Voices and You've Got Me Hummin', which were likely Joel's first video appearances. For their second album, Hour of the Wolf in 1969, Joel did all the lead vocals due to Dizek's departure a year earlier, and it took on a more psychedelic and experimental sound compared to its blue-eyed soul predecessor. Also, unlike the debut, all of the songs were original, being written by Joel with some help from Small and Dizek. Anyway, the Hassles disbanded soon after, with most of the members going their separate ways, though Joel and Small stuck together and formed Attila. The duo released their Soul album in 1970, which was an attempt at psychedelic heavy metal. In my opinion, it was at the very least a respectable effort since the instrumentation was only made up of organs and drums, though critics definitely don't seem to agree, some even calling it the worst rock album ever made. Joel himself has also referred to the album as quote-unquote psychedelic bullshit. Joel and Small's stint as Attila didn't last long, since by October 1970, their creative partnership ended after Joel began an affair with Small's then-wife Elizabeth Weber. After this, Joel went on to start his solo career, while Small became a video producer and director. The two eventually reconciled, and Small even directed some of Joel's music videos and recorded concerts. Motorcycle enthusiasm. Depending on how you see him, it may come as a surprise to know that Billy Joel really likes motorcycles. His enthusiasm for them started as early as his late teens when he owned his first bike, which was an early 1960s Triumph Tiger. This obsession continued throughout his adulthood when he purchased more during the late 70s, though didn't really start to show his liking for them publicly until the 80s, specifically with this Glass Houses promo photo that features him riding a motorcycle, along with the 1982 accident that broke both his hands, which granted wasn't on purpose, but still. His collection didn't really become publicized until 2010 with the opening of the 20th Century Cycles Motorcycle Gallery in Oyster Bay, Long Island, which houses over 50 bikes, a majority of them having modern technology with a classic design. Although Joel stores many of his bikes at his public garage, he also has a private collection on his Long Island estate, which was broken into and vandalized in January 2020. Drinking in public is illegal photo. I think that this one picture of Billy Joel smoking and holding a can of beer while standing next to a sign that reads drinking in public is illegal is pretty cool. That is all. Handball. This entry refers to a song that was only played during the Turnstiles tour. Aside from Joel screaming handball and a few other unintelligible things, the song was an instrumental, with the primary reason for its existence being for Richie Cannata to go crazy on the saxophone. The song was quickly retired after the tour due to its unpopularity, with one supposed performance ending to no applause and one audience member even shouting, "Alright, next." The only official release of the song was with the recording of the December 5th and 6th Palmer Auditorium concerts at Connecticut College, which were said to have been released on VHS in 1977 and were also uploaded to the Billy Joel YouTube channel in 2019. Considering how it was already dropped after the Turnstiles tour, Handball likely never made it into the studio, though a cover by the Funk Club from the year 2000 does exist. Goodnight Saigon backstory. Although he wrote Goodnight Saigon, a song about the experience of soldiers stationed in Vietnam, Joel actually never served in the Vietnam War since he evaded the draft. There are many different stories of how he did it, though they usually consist of Joel either getting lucky with his draft number or claiming that he was the primary source of income for his family. Anyway, Joel was reluctant to write Goodnight Saigon at first since he had no first-hand experience in the war, though after some convincing and help from a veterans group, he eventually made the song as a tribute to the lives lost in Vietnam. Joel hates We Didn't Start the Fire. Despite all the money it's raked in for him, Billy Joel doesn't really like We Didn't Start the Fire. It was one of the few songs that he wrote the lyrics to first, with the music being a very simple and repetitive melody being described by him as, quote, a mosquito buzzing around your head in a 2009 interview with Billboard, as well as, quote, one of the worst melodies he ever wrote after messing up the lyrics at a concert in 2014.
It's the same thing, verse after verse. Just the words change. One of the worst melodies I ever wrote.
Piece of the action, aka Numbers. If there was any Billy Joel outtake that could come close to matching Steely Dan's The Second Arrangement, it would probably be Piece of the Action, also known as Numbers. Like The Second Arrangement, there are multiple different takes of the song, though unlike it, Piece of the Action doesn't really have much of a backstory, which is mostly speculation. Based on the new wave-esque sound of the first 3 takes, which were first uploaded to YouTube by Rob Prisament, it was likely a scrapped song from the Glass Houses sessions, as some listeners hear different aspects of the songs that appeared on the final album in Piece of the Action. However, another take, albeit incomplete, was found among the outtakes from the bridge. The primary source of these demos is more or less unknown, and beyond what I've already said, there really isn't much more info I could find about the song. Nevertheless, fans still come back to Piece of the Action and wonder what could have been. Turnstiles is a concept album. If you really think about it, Turnstiles can kind of be considered a concept album. The way I see it, Turnstiles is loosely about Joel moving from LA back to New York, with a recurring theme of nostalgia also being present. As the opener, Say Goodbye to Hollywood establishes the beginning of Joel's journey. He reminisces of his adolescence in New York and adulthood in California through the songs Summer Highland Falls, All You Wanna Do Is Dance, James, Angry Young Man, and I've Loved These Days as he takes the Greyhound bus on the Hudson River line in New York State of Mind. Miami 2017 closes the album with his somewhat dark outlook on the future of his home, considering that New York City was going through a fiscal crisis at the time of his return. This whole thing might sound a bit absurd, so take my interpretation with a pinch of salt. Lastly, as confirmed by Joel himself, the people on the album's cover correspond to different songs. The elderly woman and the child represent Miami 2017, the girl wearing headphones represents All You Wanna Do Is Dance, the man with the sunglasses and the bag represents Say Goodbye to Hollywood, the guy with the books represents James, the man standing next to him represents Angry Young Man, and the rich couple represents I've Loved These Days. However, it's debated what song Joel corresponds to. Some believe he represents New York State of Mind, though others say that he represents Summer Highland Falls and the group as a whole represents New York State of Mind. Turnstiles Quadraphonic Mix. While we're on the topic of Turnstiles, the quadraphonic mix of the album has some interesting differences compared to its stereo counterpart. While most of these changes are mixing differences, there are a few of them that alter major elements, notably New York State of Mind, Angry Young Man, I've Loved These Days, and Miami 2017. New York State of Mind has its vocals stripped of reverb, and as I mentioned earlier, it has a unique sax section. I've Loved These Days has no reverb, as well as a completely different clarinet solo. Miami 2017's vocals and saxophone section have the delay and reverb completely removed, the horn section is much louder, and this little synth part at the end is replaced by a bugle. However, out of all of these, the mix of Angry Young Man probably has the most unique change. During the vocal section of the song, the piano is replaced by an organ, and a bit of Joel scatting the melody can be heard during these parts. Turnstile's quad mix is quite hard to find physically since there was never a tape release and there was no repress of the already pretty uncommon vinyl. Fortunately, it can be found digitally under Sony's 360 Reality Audio series, where it can be heard from paid streaming services such as Amazon Music and Tidal. There are definitely more differences than the ones I listed, so I suggest you give it a listen. The house on the Glass Houses cover was Joel's actual house. As the name of the entry suggests, the house featured on the cover of Glass Houses was Joel's home in Cove Neck, New York, in which he lived during the late 70s to the early 80s. As you might expect, Joel doesn't live on the property anymore, and according to public records, it was last sold for about $3 million in 2005. Since then, the house appears to have been repainted. Well, that was the first half of the Billy Joel Iceberg. I hope that you learned something about Mr. William Martin Joseph Joel, but if you already knew all this stuff, I hope that at the very least you were entertained. If you did, feel free to leave a like, and if you really want to, subscribe to the channel. It's completely free. Also, the source list is in the description for anyone who wants to see it. Before we end, I would like to give a special thanks to the Billy Joel fan community for archiving a lot of the information and media used in this video. It would have been incredibly hard, if not impossible, to make this video without them, so thanks a lot. I would also like to thank all of you for being so patient with me again for this one. I appreciate your support a lot, and I hope that this video didn't disappoint. Anyway, if you have any criticism, corrections, suggestions for the next part, or suggestions in general, please let me know in the comments. As always, I hope you're doing well, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you again in the next one.